Hello and welcome folks. This is my review of my new laptop, the Chuwi CoreBook X. Now this is not a paid promotion or anything, this is the laptop I chose for myself and spent my own money on. Also, I've had it less than a week, so this is an initial review. I will most likely do follow-ups later with anything else I learn or anything new that comes up. Anything that basically changes the information in this video. But this is what I got in my initial review, so let's get started.
For our dimensions, the device is 310 millimeters wide, 229.5 millimeters tall, with a thickness of 20.6 millimeters. It weighs 1,500 grams, or about 3.3 pounds. It has a pretty good light and balanced feel in the hands. I would say it definitely compares to other high-quality Ultrabooks I've used in the past. The top is made of aluminum alloy, so is the bottom. Now, it is not possible to open this device with one hand. The bottom part's too light. Now the deck does feel to be plastic. This also extends to the touchpad. On the one side, we have the SD card, headphone jack, and the USB 3.0 jack. Just a little vent near the hinge on the back, no ports. Then we have the power barrel jack connection, the USB-C, which features 20-watt charging and HDMI output. On the bottom, we've got our vent, rubber feet, and this door here is for upgrading and adding an NVMe drive. It appears to be the 4X slot. I'm going to have to look at deeper, but it appears that the loaded one is 2X and that's 4X. Now the keyboard, it is what you'd say is contextual or reactive, where the backlight is not on all the time. It comes on when you touch it. It has 2 brightness levels, and it may be annoying to some the way you have to, when you touch it, it comes on and there's a slight delay. But I'd say it's kind of a matter of preference. I'm sure it saves a little bit of battery life. I'm showing here how long it takes for it to go off. It seems to be about 20 seconds. As far as how the keyboard actually feels, it has pretty nice deep travel for how thin the laptop is. I would actually compare it to an early 2016 and previous MacBook Pro keyboard, which I know a lot of MacBook users really like that one as opposed to the ones that came immediately after. I haven't been a MacBook user, so I can't say, but it feels similar from my experience. Now, as far as using the touchpad, I did mention it's plastic, but it is very large and the precision is very nice. The clicks were pretty consistent. It was a little stiffer towards the top than the bottom, but other than that, I really can't complain. I didn't feel any inconsistency, like the touchpad itself was not glued down evenly. It had a really good feel, and I'm not really someone who uses the touchpad much, but I was satisfied. I want to quickly note something kind of unusual about this laptop's BIOS, which could be a benefit or could be a curse depending on your situation. But that is that it's unlocked, or I should say not locked. I don't mean unlocked in the sense that, it's modified so that processors that are not supposed to be whitelisted work. I mean, the functions that are normally locked in a consumer BIOS that ships out of the factory are not locked, and pretty much everything that the manufacturers have access to you can see within the BIOS. Now, I do want to note that although you can see all these functions because it's everything the chipset supports, most of these actually aren't going to do anything because this processor does not allow you to change those values. So you should be safe on a bunch of these, but some of this is really stuff that you should not mess with. And I honestly, I did not go through and just test them all because this is my personal laptop, but that was a little unusual, and you should be careful what you mess with in this BIOS. Before I begin this section, I do just want to say that this laptop does not appear to be designed to be disassembled, and do it at your own risk. Don't say I told you to, because I'm telling you not to unless you have really good reason. But just to help you make that decision, I've done it for you. So if you do decide to take this laptop apart, you do have to take the upper pads off to get to the final 2 screws. You don't have to take the lower 2 pads off. So I did that for no reason. Had to put them back on, but there are not screws under those. If you do decide that you need to take this laptop apart, first you're going to want to take off the upgradable drive door, which has 2 screws on the left side, and then it pulls up from that side as well and has feet on the right side. Now, it's a little bit hard to pry up. It doesn't spring up. You may need to use a spudger. Then you're going to have 13 total screws revealed once you remove the feet. that you have to remove. Now, I used a J00 head. That seems to frequently be the one for small laptops. If you do try to use a standard Philips one, just be careful trying to get one that fits in there. I'd say, you know, a 1 or a 1.5, but just make sure that it grips before you start turning, or you may strip out your screws. I've heard that over and over again. I got them out with no trouble with a J00 or 00. Now, when I pulled this case apart with a spudger, it definitely, it felt a little iffy as I was going around. It did end up coming out fine. I had to be the most careful around the ports and the hinge, but it does come off once you have all of these screws out. And once you've got it off, this is what you're going to be looking at inside. Now, although there are some things that, you know, have a little bit of a cheap appearance, like the pretty thin wires and the anti-static tape used in here, this is actually a really good design, in my opinion, for a thin and light laptop. The thing I'm most pleased with is that there's full backing behind the keyboard tray, protecting all the major components. Since your keyboard is the only hole in the upper deck of the laptop where something hitting your keyboard, if there's not enough structure behind it, could be hitting your major components. As you can see, you're right behind it. So compared to a lot of cheaper thin laptops, it really bothers me when I don't see enough protection between the keyboard and the components. It's very good in that. Now, there's not really anything upgradable here besides the M2 slot that they give you an access door from. And you can also replace the original drive. Now, the original drive is a Kingston 256 gig SATA interface drive. Weirdly, I couldn't match any of the numbers on it to a part number on Kingston's website, so it must just be, you know, a generic that they put in laptops that they don't sell on its own or something. But I apologize. I did not test the speeds, and I'm finishing the video now. I'm not going to do it because I'm planning to swap out for an NVMe drive. I have seen actually other benchmarks of this laptop with it, and it appears to perform very standard for a SATA M2 drive. Maybe I'll add that later, and I do feel bad about that. I just didn't even think about it because I was planning to put in an NVMe drive. Now, other than that, the RAM is dual channel, which is always a good thing when it's not upgradable. So 16 gigs of dual channel RAM is, you know, pretty excellent for a system like this, and you should feel pretty good about it, which you kind of have to because it's not upgradable. Now, this cooling is pretty good in my opinion. These rails are thin, but you have 2 heat rails, and it seems to do a very good job. I was getting excellent temperatures, so I did not repaste. I just took it, opened it up to take this picture, and I didn't mess with anything. But this is what it looks like inside. In my opinion, a pretty good design, though they definitely, you know, you can see wires are not shrouded and they're a little thin looking. Okay, 8 minutes into the video, let's introduce the star of the show, the screen. Now, I want to apologize real quick. I didn't use any advanced testing, and this is mainly because I have pretty poor vision, and I often struggle with advanced testing of screens because I'm often not able to use the references. So I took pictures to compare, and I just have to compare with my own experience using other devices. Now, it's reported to be about 300 nits. Others have said that that's accurate. That seems about correct to me based on my experience, which means it is enough to be visible even outdoors in daylight, as long as there's not direct sunlight on the screen. There's definitely some glare since it is a laminated gloss screen, but the brightness is enough, especially with lighter backgrounds, that it's visible. Now, I used the same stock image from Chuwi's website. I love this image. It reminds me of science fiction Dark Souls. But I compared it in multiple different brightness levels of outdoors, not in direct sunlight on a sunny day. It's always a sunny day here in New Mexico. Indoors with lots of lights on. And then finally with in almost a dark room with some sunlight coming in, which in a fairly dim room, this display absolutely shines. It just looks wonderful watching movies, playing especially emulated games. I'll get into that later, but it absolutely dazzles in a fairly dim environment, and it's still workable with some glare even in a fairly bright environment. It doesn't, I wouldn't watch a movie on it outdoors, but you can still use it, which devices under 250 nits, even for someone who's not picky, you just pretty much can't use them at all in brightly lit rooms or outdoors, and it's just a problem if it's a work laptop. So for me, and the fact that I need to take it around with me and use it, sometimes on the hood of my car, in my car, standing outside, it makes it usable, and that to me was a really big thing. I only ran a few synthetic benchmarks just to basically confirm that the performance of this processor was in line with what we would expect, so that basically you can just look up the many benchmarks that exist for this processor and know what to expect. And I found that it was very close in line. I did 5 Cinebench runs, and I averaged about 900 single core and 2250 multi-core, which is really not bad for this, and again is in line with thin laptops that have this same processor. I also ran Geekbench 5 and got a single core of about 900 and a multi-core of about 2000, again across 5 runs. Now, these are a little lower than some of the other scores you'll see on Geekbench 5, but that's because some of these tests include your storage, and a lot of those results are going to be MacBook Pros that only ship with NVMe drives. So basically, if you went down and looked at the numbers, it was almost identical to what you would expect for this processor. Now, I do want to point out, I saw a review for the CoreBook X that, let's just say it was one of those ones that looks a little suspicious, like maybe it was made by the manufacturer themselves. And they also ran Cinebench and Geekbench, and their scores were basically 10% higher than you would ever expect to get with a laptop running this, and were more in line with what you would get on like a mini desktop like a Mac Mini. So I kind of suspect that those are a little bit suspicious, and that either they ran it in a freezing temperature room, or that Chuwi provided those from the core box and not the CoreBook. So yeah, if your numbers look like mine, that's normal, and that's in line with what you should expect for this CPU. I'm not testing a bunch of games at this time. I definitely don't recommend this as a gaming laptop, but even if I'm reviewing a vacuum cleaner, 50 people are going to comment and ask if it runs Fortnite, so I tested Fortnite. Now, rather than running at a fraction of the native resolution, I'm at 720p and all settings at low, so you can directly compare this with other benchmarks of this exact same processor and IGP. Now, as far as the settings, everything is at low. I do want to note a couple things though, that I noticed a less than 1 FPS on average drop to put view distance up to medium, which is always beneficial to gameplay. Also, I tried testing it in the experimental DirectX 12 mode, and it crashed and ran worse. So as is often the case with Intel integrated, anything that says experimental means not for you. And that was the case in this game. Now, I also did a battle lab instead of actually playing the game online. I haven't played this game in a couple of years, and I didn't want to get shot in the face 2 seconds after getting in and have to do multiple matches just to get a benchmark test. But it should be pretty close to the start of a match when there's not a lot of players and action around you. And much like other things that I tested, the performance was exactly in line with what you would expect. It's pretty standard on integrated graphics to see a little bit of hitching and stuttering when you're initially diving in Fortnite. That's the case here, but I definitely didn't find it to be bad at all. Once you get down on the map and everything is loaded in, it was pretty consistently between 40 and 50 frames per second, though it did have frequent drops to the mid-30s. There were only a couple of times when it was loading in a lot of assets that it dropped below 30 frames per second just for a second or so once I was actually on the ground. And that's very playable by the standard of integrated graphics, and is perfectly in line with the many benchmarks that exist for this processor and IGP. So I tested Fortnite, folks. Please, nobody ask me if this will run Minecraft or Roblox. Just, search engines are your friend. This performs right in line with the Intel Iris Plus 650, which has been out for 4 years now, and many people have tested that. So just take my word that every test I've done on this system was almost exactly in line with the standard for these parts. Yes, it will run Minecraft and Roblox and all that other casual nonsense that runs on everything for the last 3 or 4 years. Please don't blow up my comments with that. Or I'm sure now people will, just to annoy me. But hey, you can see it runs Fortnite. I dodged that one at least. The other AAA game I tested is actually Death Stranding. Now, not because I think a lot of people are going to be clamoring to know if this laptop runs Death Stranding well, but because Death Stranding is actually notorious for crashing, and specifically if any part of your computer is too slow to keep up with the various processes. And This makes it notorious for crashing even more on integrated graphics because they're not able to allocate enough shared memory fast enough, and it gives you a not enough memory error and crashes. That was the case on the 1065 G7 at 15 watts that I tested last month, where it just, as soon as I got out of the tutorial and into the main parts of the game in larger areas, it would crash, and anytime I tried to load a save in those areas, it would crash because it just wasn't able to give it enough memory fast enough. So this is an excellent demonstration of even a weaker IGP with more wattage for the processor so that it can allocate things around quicker and it can turbo the speeds up faster. Games that just plain won't launch sometimes with 15-watt Intel chips will actually work. So the loading time was terrible, and we finally made it into the game, and it works at 15 frames per second, which is not at all playable, but it's a great example of how the Iris Pro G7 graphics in that processor would have been able to run it at, borderline playable frames, but it's not even able to run the game, and it crashes as soon as you get out of the tutorial. So that's why you'll see in, sites like Notebook Check, it will sometimes just have a did not start on a game or did not function. That's a lot of times what's going on. Is it just the Intel graphics is not able to allocate enough memory quick enough or something like that that causes the game to outright crash? But then you'll see other devices that seem to have the same integrated graphics, it won't. Well, usually that's because those are 25, 26, 28 watt low voltage processors as opposed to 12 and 15 watts. And that's the case here with Death Stranding. So I just wanted to demonstrate that. I am going to do an entire video, I think, dedicated to emulation, because this is one of my favorite things about this system, is how older games that run in 4:3 aspect ratio look absolutely fantastic on the 3:2 screen with narrow bars on the side, and the colors and everything. It looks excellent playing games like Sonic Adventure, which I'm showing here. Now, I tested this on ReDream and it ran excellent. Just as a guess, based on the many tests I've seen with this processor, I'm going to guess that it's going to top out at running Wii games on Dolphin, and that Wii U and PS3 will be just out of reach. But Dreamcast ran absolutely fantastic and held a steady 60 frames per second. And, games in 4:3 just absolutely look great, and especially bright colored games like Sonic and Mario look just fantastic on this screen. And since that's a lot of what I do is emulate and play older games as opposed to caring that much about modern ones, that is another thing that makes this system really great for me, and I think I'm just absolutely going to love doing that on it.
Okay, I'm going to just do a quick test of the webcam here, which is not good. This would be good enough, I would say, for teleconferencing. It definitely doesn't do you any favors. I don't feel like I look like a zombie here looking at this, but it's functional. It has decent enough low light processing. I'm just using a ring light in front of me right now, and I have all the other lights in the room off. The sound is, I'm gonna have to play this back later, but I did a clip before, and it's not awesome, but it is functional. People will be able to hear you and they will be able to see you. I would definitely not stream with this. So, if you are a streamer, this laptop is not going to be an all-in-one solution out of the box. If you care about quality at all for the feed of yourself and the clarity of your voice, I would definitely get a podcasting mic and a standalone camera of some kind. Now, also, although this webcam does report that it's delivering at 30 frames per second, it's a 720p resolution, by the way, 720p resolution, 30 frames per second. It seems that the sensor is just really slow, so there's a lot of blurring with any movement. You can see it really badly. The fan behind me. So yeah, this is probably, I would actually say, the weakest point of this computer, which is a good thing to say, in my opinion, if the webcam on a $500 computer is the only thing you can really complain about, but it's definitely not good. So in conclusion, I have to say that emotional first reaction when I pulled this out of the box, I immediately fell in love with it. And there's a very simple reason for that. When you're really picky about what you want in a device, the usual experience is you search around everywhere and there's nothing that's exactly what you want. You always feel like the manufacturers made different decisions than what you would have done, trying to hit that price point of what you can afford. Now, I was looking around everywhere and I wanted something that had a good screen, preferably 3:2 aspect for doing more work and less gaming and content consuming if I could, and also had a good enough processor, good lightweight design, good keyboard, all of that. Basically the things that you want in a higher end Ultrabook, but making sacrifices that I can live with so that it could hit a price point that I can afford, which is about $500 at the moment. And this laptop immediately did that for me. And after testing it, I have to say I'm not disappointed. The performance has been right in line with what I would expect from this processor. And since it's been around for a while and I was able to research that, it perfectly met my expectations. It's going to be great for 1080p video editing, which is what I'm going to stick with for the moment. At some point in the future, I'm going to buy a higher end computer when I can afford one so I can make 4K videos longer than a few minutes. But at the moment, for my needs, it met it perfectly, and it had the stuff that I thought was not even an option in the price range I wanted, like the screen. The screen is definitely the highlight here, but the thing that made this worth considering for me versus some of the Chuwi devices in the past is that it actually comes with a halfway decent ULB processor instead of, like a Celeron or a Pentium, where they released one that had an i3. But even though this chipset is a few years old now, still, when being compared to the other devices in the price range that do have low-end processors, it's still able to keep up just fine. And the graphics are much, much better than what's in the Pentiums and Celerons. And all around, it makes it good enough that you don't feel like, for the screen, you're totally compromising all around in performance, and that it's not going to meet your needs compared to other laptops you could buy for the price, where you just have to sacrifice the screen. It has an amazing screen, great design, really, really good keyboard for the price, and it's a pretty good processor. I know it's easy to just look at years and generations and say, oh, that processor is 4 years old, it's garbage compared to what I can get now. Even with the improvements in IPC, the thing of this being a 28 watt processor versus a 15 watt processor is I found in a lot of use scenarios, it actually outperformed the i7-1065 G7 that I tested in the Lenovo laptop I ended up returning last month. And so although that's a quad core and they've supposedly doubled performance per wattage, so you would think that it would be able to keep up or exceed with this dual core 4-thread processor, because the throttling limits it so frequently in a 15 watt processor, I found that this actually, in things like sustained video editing or gaming for any length of time, I found that this was much better overall. Sure, you may be able to get a benchmark really quickly with those that looks better, but to actually run things over the long term, I didn't find this throttling much or at all when I was doing things for several hours at a time. Battery life was right in line with what the manufacturer was promising, so that's always good when they're not outrageously exaggerating the claims. As I said, for the performance, it's right in line with what you would expect of a device like this with this processor. And again, I think that those benchmarks in that one review were somewhat suspect. So if you get this laptop and your benchmarks look more like mine, or a MacBook Pro 13, or any of the other devices that have had this CPU in the past, that's normal, that's fine. If you're not getting that 10% faster that all of their benchmarks had, I don't want to call anyone a liar or a cheat necessarily, but they either did that in a freezing temperature room, or those benchmarks are actually from the core box and that those were provided by Chuwi and they cheated a little bit, because they're right in line with the benchmarks that you would get in a Mac Mini with that processor, but not in any Ultrabook that I've seen. So yeah, exactly what I expected. No disappointments. The only really weak thing I would say is the webcam. The only thing in this that's substandard that you could in other $500 laptops get one that's better is the webcam. It's just really not great in any way. But that being said, that's probably one of the first things that I would choose to sacrifice to get all this other stuff in this package. And the other things that are small sacrifices, like coming with a SATA interface drive instead of an NVMe drive, it's big enough and fast enough to get you going, rather than in other cases they want to use a fast drive to get the fastest speeds and everything on tests, but you get a 128 gig drive in a laptop, which is, especially in ones that only have one slot where you have to toss it out and put another one in, it's just not the choice most of us would make. Almost everything, everything in this are the exact choices I would make if I got to design a laptop from scratch and pick what it was going to have for this price point that I could afford. I don't think I honestly could have done better. When I opened it up, I was pretty pleased with the design inside. Yeah, of course, there's stuff like cheap wires and things like that, but the body, the frame, the back plate, everything in there that you would expect in a quality laptop, rather than some of these really, really cheap unbranded devices that we're seeing that are even being rebranded as HPs, Lenovo's, common brands that you expect to see worldwide. they're made of such a low quality, and the things that they sacrifice are sometimes structural and strength things that, stop the laptop from being broken if it's dropped or things are dropped on it. I didn't find those kind of cutbacks inside this laptop. And that really, really pleased me to see that, again, they made the right decisions to hit the price point. So I'm very impressed with this laptop. I honestly have to say I'm in love with it, and I have to kind of temper my emotions a little bit so that I can be objective, where if, any little problems do come up, I'm, upfront about it, like, okay, I don't, live in denial. It's easy to be in denial when you really want something to work. And, some little thing comes up that could be a deal breaker, which is, again, that's why I returned the last laptop that I everything about it I was really happy with. But then even just like sitting in my car, which is something I frequently do while working, you couldn't even see the screen. I mean, even not with direct sunlight in it, like in my tinted windows in my car, it wasn't even usable. This is enough. It's like 100 nits brighter. It's totally, even with the glossy screen and a little bit of glare, you can use it outdoors, even in New Mexico, which is, that's a pretty good achievement for a laptop, especially under $1,000. And for a $500 laptop, it's a remarkable screen. Everyone, whoever has this laptop, and every review you're going to see, they're going to go on about the screen, like a lot of Chuwi laptops. But in this case, this is the first one that we've released where I would say the processor is definitely good enough that you can actually get a lot done with this. You're not just doing basic tasks on a beautiful screen. This is a laptop I'm going to be using. Hopefully it lasts me through till next year when I do my next big swap out and sell all the computers so that I can afford to buy new ones. But at the moment, I'm really in love with this device. I'm really impressed with Chuwi as a brand. I'm just going to close out here a final thing in my conclusion that I know a lot of Americans have, and people from everywhere but China, have prejudice against Chinese devices. And some of this is just based on, nationalism. China is a rival nation to the United States and Britain in commerce and all kinds of stuff. And so that is baked right into us from our politicians of wanting us to view those countries as rivals and not buy their products, even though they buy their products and it's all a bunch of nonsense. But some of it is based purely on ignorance. And a lot of people have this idea that, if you buy something with a Chinese brand name on it, first of all, that makes a difference. No, it makes no difference. All these devices that you're buying that are being sold as HPs, whatever, they are also made in China. MacBooks are made in China. They're all made in China. So even if they're assembled in the United States, like some Apple devices are, that doesn't matter. If the core components that could be spying on you come from China, there's just as much of a chance of that happening. Oh, my TV you'll have to live with it. Sorry for my bad AV quality. But if the camera module and the logic board and everything is made in China and it's going to spy on you, they all pass the same FCC inspection when they come into the United States, at least. So this device with a Chinese brand name on it, or your HP that was made down the street, they go through the same inspection. And if our inspectors are not smart enough to catch it, then Apple's not smart enough to catch it, and your webcam could be spying on you. So basically what I'm saying is that just looking at something and seeing a Chinese brand name and saying, oh, it's probably got spy technology, that doesn't make sense on any logical level. Where that's going to happen is in software. Once you get it in a computer, if you start up a computer and it seems fine, and then it downloads some bloatware and your system starts acting weird, okay, that sounds like spyware. Software can be downloaded onto your system that can spy on you and can harm you. But the concept of a webcam with an extra little module built in somewhere that's sending off information to the Chinese government or the Russian government or whoever, wherever the thing is coming from, you'd have to think that our inspectors are absolute morons. And I guarantee you they have at least the level of training and knowledge that I have, where when I look around at a motherboard, I know what the chips are. When I look at the little chips and I see the brand names and part numbers on them, I'm like, oh, okay, I recognize that brand. That's a storage controller. That's for power. I know what those are. And so if there was an extra storage controller or something in there, you'd be like, wait, why is there an extra one right next to it? That's weird. Or if there was just a mystery chip that did not, line up with anything that you've seen before on a motherboard, someone who is knowledgeable is going to see that. So that all of this is just based on ignorant people who probably have radio talk shows and don't know what they're talking about. You need to be afraid of spyware software. But the concept of, that a Chinese laptop is going to spy on you, that is nonsense. And all your laptops are Chinese, I'm sorry. So the idea that matters to quality, security, any of that, it takes a great deal of ignorance and paranoia to look at it that way. Now, that's not to say that a lot of devices that come from China may not have spyware software tried to bundle onto them that installs once you start it up, or things like that. There's things like that I've heard of in the past. But this concept that I've heard of people saying in devices I've reviewed before is, oh, I'm going to get something that's not made in China. I'm going to buy an HP. I'm just like, it's not how it works, genius. So yeah, that's my closing on this, and that's not something I worried on before people ask and fire up my comments of, oh, are you afraid to buy something with a Chinese brand name on it? No, because this is actually the great thing about Chuwi that I'm the most impressed about, is that this is all them. They have their own designers. They pick their configurations. That's why it's a little different than the other laptops and stuff that you're seeing. They are a brand within themselves. It's not just stuff like, sadly, what you think is an HP or a Lenovo is a generic, made in a generic factory in Shenzhen that is like, it makes no difference. Like, it could be made in a different factory one day, and then down the street they're making it the next week, and they're just meeting the requirements of HP's shipments. And it is literally the same white books that are being sold as, Victors and all those other crazy brand names that you find on Alibaba and stuff. There is no difference. So that's just not a thing. I would much rather buy something where the company from top to bottom, they decided how it was going to be. And there's no bloatware on this thing or anything. It seems really, the BIOS seems really optimized, so it's a little weird that all the stuff is not locked. But yeah, they seem to do it the way I do. So whether they're Chinese, American, British, if they seem to solve problems the way I do, then I trust them. Honestly, this is, people come after me, nationalists are going to hate me, but I trust people that solve problems the way I do more than I trust my own government, significantly. So I'm going to close with that. But I'm in love with this laptop so far. And no, I'm not afraid the webcam is spying on me.